to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk. And as was mentioned, I am Daphna, and I am a student and still doing my PhD at Weizmann Institute at the lab of Professor Eran Segal. And this work was recently published in Nature, and I hope you'll find it interesting. This is a biological talk with a focus on machine learning. So I know that probably the large majority of you are non-biologists and don't have the background in biology, so I don't expect any prior knowledge. And if I come across any technical, I don't know, if I say some word that you don't understand, so for this, please do raise your hand and just ask. And I'll just, see how cooperative are you. Who from you, if you can raise your hand, have heard the word microbiome? Okay, so that's a large half. Who haven't? Let's see. Okay, good job. So almost everyone, I think, raised their arms at some point. So the talk of today is why can't we maintain our weight after dieting? So this work is a joint project. Can everyone see the slide? Okay. With two talented students from another lab in Weizmann, from the lab of Eran Elinav, Shlomik and Christoph. And the question is, what happens when we diet? So people are very successful in general in dieting. So it's not easy to lose weight, but people are successful in losing weight, and there are various different types of diets. Low-fat diet, high-carb, different types, paleo, and people manage to lose weight. And you can see in this illustration that someone here started as obese, and then he is doing a diet, he loses his weight, and then after some time, now that you look at him, he looks again fat. And this is a really known phenomena. It's called the yo-yo effect, where not only do people have a tendency for weight loss and weight gain cycles, but if you look over time, you can see that they have an effect where they keep on at every cycle increasing their weight over time. And then one has to ask himself whether it's even good to do a diet, because if you can't maintain a diet, you might as well stay in your original weight and maybe not gain as much weight. And we wanted to understand what happens and what causes this yo-yo effect. And for this, we started by building a mouse model. We wanted to see if we can imitate this phenomena. And if you look here, in this diagram, you have here a blue mouse. This blue mouse is eating a high-fat diet, and his weight constantly increases. And we have a control mice. This control mice is eating just a high-carb diet, and you can see that he also gains some weight over time, but this is because he's aging and they just accumulate weight, but he has a very stable increase in his weight. And now we have a mouse that is going through these current episodes of gain weight and gain loss. So initially we put him on a high-fat diet, then we put him on the high-carb diet, so he loses weight and he goes back to the control mice weight. Then we put him on a second cycle of high-fat diet, and again he loses his weight. And this mouse has something that is very interesting. Now we compare this mice. We call this mice a cycling high-fat diet because he goes through cycles. And we compare this mouse to a mouse that we call a prime high-fat diet, which we had only seen once high-fat. And you can see that at this time point, both mice, the cycling mice and the prime high-fat diets, they weigh the same. But now when you put both groups on a high-fat diet, you can see that the one that doesn't have an obese history gains less weight than the one that already has an obese history. So this area is marked here in blue, and this is exactly the yo-yo effect that I'm talking about. So we can already see that we can observe this phenomena in mice. And this recurrent obesity induces other unfavorable metabolic effects, not only weight gain. So if we compare the fat composition in their body You can see that the cycling high-fat diet has a higher fat across his body when he's gaining weight, and he has a higher cholesterol compared to the green mice. And the colors will remain the same throughout the talk, so always you need to compare the green and the red curves plot. And we ask, is there a memory of previous obesity? And their answer is, you can already say that there is, because if you look at this time point, they weigh the same. So there's something different between them. So somehow at this time point, although they look the same, if you look at them, something must be something different. There should be some memory that will cause that the second time that they will encounter a high-fat diet, the mouse who has already had a high-fat diet before will gain more weight. So we try to understand what is this memory. And we looked at very different parameters. We tried to understand what could be this memory effect. We looked at different metabolic features. So for example, this is maybe lots of details, but the point is to say that we tested lots of phenotypes. There, if you do like checking how diabetic they are at that time point, so let's go back for a second. Everything that I'm going to show you now are measurements at that time point, because this is the time point which is critical to understand what is the difference between the group. And at that time point, we check different parameters. For example, they have the same glucose response when you put them on sugar, and similar insulin levels. And we checked for different physiologic features. So they burn the same amount of energy at time point 0 when they weigh the same. So it's not about energy expenditure, and it's not about food consumption. They eat the same. So it's not that the one mice eats more than the other when it encounters high-fat diet. And also we look at different immune features of their immune system, and again, they look the same. So what is this memory effect? And the answer is, I can already tell you that the microbiome is the difference. And since I don't expect anyone to know what is the microbiome, so let's give a few minutes about saying what is the microbiome. So the microbiome is generally the entire microbes that reside on a host. And the large majority of microbes reside in our gut. So if you're in humans, for example, we have about 2 kilos of bacteria inside our gut, which is a lot. It's like about our brain. You can consider it as another organ, and it has a lot of functionalities. So a lot of disease states in different, you can already know, it's in the very simple case, you eat something rotten, then you feel bad, it's probably because of bacteria. But not only that, you can find more and more articles that are associating between different disease, even cancer, to bacteria. And in this case, we were also very excited to understand whether there is a microbiome pattern that can show this memory effect. And the type of data that we're looking at when we're saying microbiome is data that is very interesting for a data scientist. It's usually a very large data set. If you can think about it, in this case, we have here different mice, and so these could be the rows, and the columns here would be the bacteria. And usually, when you want to examine like a large data set of N on M matrix, then one thing in many cases you would want to see is maybe to visualize the data. So a very known way to do it is to use a principal component analysis. And just a word about whoever is not familiar with it, is basically, let's say you only had, it's usually used for dimensionality reduction, so for visualization, but what it does, it changes the axis of your data. So let's say bacteria 1 and bacteria 2 could be your X and Y axes, and let's say you only have 2 features here, bacteria 1 and bacteria 2, and this is all you had. So all the points here will reside on this plane, and then if you ask what is the axis that has the most information, the most variance on it, you would tell that W has the largest variance. So this would be the first principal component. The second principal component is you're looking for an axis which is orthogonal to the first one and still maintains the second largest variance in the data. So in this case, this is the vector V. And now with the axes W and V, you don't lose any information if you plot all points now using these two axes. But you can even choose to even disregard axis V, because W still holds the majority of the information. And this is exactly what you do if you have n bacteria, and so you can choose to look at 2 dimensions, 1 dimension, 3 dimensions. You can't do more than that. And we asked, how does the microbiome composition look? So looking at time point 0 is before even the experiment began. It's just all mice are the same. Then looking at the first principal component, the second principal component, this is what you have here at the bottom axes, then all mice look the same. Here each dot again represents a mouse and represents the bacterial composition of the first 2 principal components. And now the plot above shows you like the timeline of what is happening here. If you look at the time point where we give the cycling mice the high-fat diet, you can see that the group of the cycling mice separates the microbiome from the group of those who haven't ever seen high-fat diet. And now, after obesity, which is this time point, you can see a separation where the high-fat diet are still very different, and the cycling mice went a little bit back, but still they didn't return fully to their original microbiome state. And this is what we can consider as a memory, because it holds some information. And we wanted to establish that this indeed, this microbiome is causative of the extra weight gain. And what we do is we give them antibiotics. So now what we do is we take the mice who are fat, we put them on a diet, and at this time we give all groups antibiotics, including those who are dieting. And now when we put them again on a high-fat diet, and we compare them to the group who only encounter for the first time a high-fat diet, you can see that they gain the same amount of weight. And now here only showing the first PC, you can see exactly this, that after obesity plus antibiotics, the control group and the cycling group are indistinguishable. So this is very nice because it proves a point that you give some microbiome, you give antibiotics and it causes a real change. But giving antibiotics is like taking a hammer of 5 kilos and like dropping on the mice. It causes a really big change in their microbiome. And we wanted to see something which is maybe a bit more delicate. We wanted to see if the microbiome alone has the capability of transferring this phenomena of extra exacerbated weight regain. So what we do, we have in Weizmann, we have a germ-free facility where we have sterile mice, and this offers us the opportunity to actually see something causative, to actually only give them the microbiome and see what happens. And this is what we do. We take this time point, the time point where the cycling mice are the same as the control group. And at that time point, we take their stool sample. Stool is kaki. So, yes, I deal with stool. So at that time point, we take the stool sample from either the cycling, the mouse who has an obese history, or we take the stool sample of the control mice who has never been fat. And this stool, we give it to 2 groups. We give this stool to germ-free mice, and now the germ-free mice, you can now see what happens when we put that mouse on a high-fat diet. We can check if it will gain more than expected weight gain or not. And this is what we do, and this is exactly what you see. Now this orange curve is the weight gain that the germ-free mice accumulate when they have the donor from a cycling, which is the ex-obese mice. And if you compare it to getting a high-fat diet, eating a high-fat diet but getting the microbiome from the control group, you have less gain weight. And this goes the same for the glucose response, meaning that they're more diabetic after this germ-free, after this microbiome transfer. So the next thing that we thought would be really interesting is to predict what would be the weight regain now that at that time point, let's say we will look at the two mice, and maybe only by their microbiome composition we can predict how much gain they will gain. And if you think about it at the clinical perspective, that would be that maybe if it works also on the people, then maybe you can go to the doctor, you can give him a stool sample and tell him your condition, and then maybe he can tailor a personalized medicine for you based on your microbiome. And this is what we do. We, at that time point, like I said, we only take the microbiome as the data set. This is the matrix of the data. And we build a machine learning predicting model, and we ask two questions. We have two prediction tasks. One, we want to see if, using the microbiome composition, if we can predict the history, meaning if we can predict if this stool belongs to an exobese mice or does it belong to the control group. And the second, which is a much more complicated question, is to predict what would be the percent of their weight gain. So the first one is a classification problem, and the second one is a regression problem that you want to answer. Okay, so to do the classification problem, we use random forest classifier, which is an ensemble classifier, meaning that it's built on many classifiers. These are all parameters that you can play with, where each one is a tree. It's a simple tree, and eventually you take this forest of all of the trees together, and you do a majority vote. Now that you get a new sample, you will check what does each tree alone predict, if it's going to be the control or the exobese mice, and according to the majority vote, you decide what is the answer. And for the gradient and for the regression problem of weight prediction, we do a gradient boosting regression. What is gradient boosting? So gradient boosting, again, you have here your data set. This is the features, it's X. You have your predictive weight gain, which is Y for every mouse. This is the I. And what you want to do, the objective would be to minimize the distance between the original Y and your predicted Y. And it's built again on simple trees. And each tree is a weak tree. And at every stage of the gradient boosting, you build another tree. But at first you want to predict Y. But at the second stage, you build another tree, but this time you try to predict the residual times some eta, some learning curve. And if this learning parameter is small, then it reduces the chance of overfitting, because you're actually learning the residual each time. So you want to improve with time, and this is what we do. And what we observed is that the first task, which was the prediction task, we do a really good job at predicting, almost perfect job. And you could maybe also imagine that would be the result after you've seen the PCA, because you've seen that it's easy. With your eyes, it was a clear separation between the groups. And you can ask, okay, so maybe the regression of the predicting how much would be the weight gain, maybe it's also a simple task. And the answer is no, it's not as easy, because you can see that this is one group of mice, and this is another group of mice. So they can gain, you can see that they're different, right? You get a correlation, but it's not very good. If you just predict only based, if the feature was only if it was an exobese mice or a control, you don't really get a really good score. And the question is, how good can we get? And based only on the microbiome as features, we get a really nice, actually, correlation of 0.56. But the thing is, we can do a lot better. We can get to 0.72. And how do we do that? And this is actually an open question, because these are the features that I'm using, and maybe a lot of feature engineering can do a lot better. But what we did here, we discovered that if you tell the predictor that you have a really good feature, then you really help it. So the feature that we told it that it's really good to use is the predicted obese history. So we already know that we're really good at predicting if you're a mice of the control group or the ex-obese group. And now we would like to feed this information in. So there are two ways to do that. You can either just add another feature, which is the predicted mouse phenotype, and use that as another input feature. And this is actually not bad, but you can do actually a lot better. And what we found that does the best is to do a two-step. It's already both are two-step, right? If I use the output of the classification problem and now use it as another input, so this is like, it's like a stacking problem. So we have two steps, but what we've done is we've done something a bit different, which is taking our predictor, and once we predicted what is the mouse history, ex-obese or slim, now with the gradient boosting, we only train it on the group that is relevant, that we think will be good. So we predict only based on ex-obese mice, or we train another predictor based only on the slim mice. And we do a leave one cross-validation in both, and this resulted in the result with the output here result that you see. Another nice thing that you can do basically is to ask which features are important. And we ranked them, and we indeed found that in the top 10 there are many interesting bacteria. Actually, lactobacillus is one that is very familiar. It's something that you have in your yogurts. You can do that if it's with trees. You can look at where it's in the hierarchy, this feature, or if it's with a regression, then you can look at the coefficients. And next, going back to biology, we asked if we can treat this relapsing obesity, because now we know that the microbiome is causal. So, you can give people maybe antibiotics. But again, antibiotics is a really harsh solution. We would like to actually see if we can do something a lot more subtle, maybe probiotics or prebiotics, something that would be like better as a solution. And what we've done here is we wanted to check whether giving bacteria by itself, which you could imitate maybe as probiotics, give someone a pill which contains bacteria, if that can ameliorate, improve the outcome. So here what we do is we take the mice which have an obese history, and at the time point where they're slim, we give them a microbiome transplant, either from a control mice that had never gone through obese episodes, or from the same type of donor, like an obese mice, that's like the control group. And what we see is that if you had before the cycling red curve, now that you give the transplant from a control group, you get this orange curve, meaning that with probiotics you have the potential to eliminate this extra weight gain. So this is very nice, and what we've done next, we wanted to ask, maybe now that we understand that bacteria are causing it, maybe we can actually do something more subtle, even than giving bacteria to the mice. We tried to see which compounds change between the control group and the ex-obese group. What are compounds? We actually looked at which metabolites, what happens when they eat, what changes. So what is the difference in the composition of the compounds in their gut between the two groups? And we find that there are two types of molecules, both belonging to the flavonoid family. It's molecules that are plant-based. They have a plant origin. They're called apigenin and originin, but the names are not really important. And we've noticed that before obesity, these compounds are high. But after obesity, they remain, during obesity and after, they remain low for a very, very long time. So 15 weeks is a very long time in a mouse diet, and actually we've noticed that only after half a year, like about 20-something weeks, it goes back to normal, the levels. And these molecules have like an antibiotic effect, and the bacteria actually, they don't like it. So what we've encountered is that those who are the ex-obese mice have more bacteria who tend to break this molecule. So what we've done is we've given at that time point here, where they're slim, we've given them for a long time the flavonoids from either group as a supplement. And what we can see is that when we give this supplement, then again, we get a nice, a lower increase in the weight gain, like you have here. So this is also a very good solution, and this is actually eating like something which is a plant-based. So I will summarize the talk. What we found is that we have a mouse model for the yo-yo effect. We found that the gut microbiome features a memory-like function. We found that the microbiome is necessary and both sufficient to induce this enhanced metabolic derangement upon weight regain. Using machine learning approaches, we can accurately predict the mouse history and also, more difficultly, the weight gain. And my take-home message from this prediction task is that sometimes using a pipeline will get you a better result because it forces specialization. And we found that metabolic induces alterations which are good, and in this case, ameliorate the phenomena of weight gain. And this could serve as potential novel therapeutics in help of solving the effective long-term weight management solutions. And with that, I would like to thank my advisor, Ran Segal, and the lab from Ran Elinab, the mates from there. Thank you. If you have any questions. Yes.
Have you tried adding the measurements of flavonoids into the regression model later?
No, we didn't do that. To predict if I would get now less, no, we didn't do that.